Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into the story of how an unexpected marriage contract turned into a life-changing love story. As Sarah signed the contract and Ethan's gaze lingered on her, a new chapter began. Neither of them could have known that this simple, calculated arrangement would soon change the course of their lives in ways they never imagined. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into the story of how an unexpected marriage contract turned into a life-changing love story. As Sarah signed the contract and Ethan's gaze lingered on her, a new chapter began. Neither of them could have known that this simple, calculated arrangement would soon change the course of their lives in ways they never imagined. It had only been a few days since Sarah signed the marriage contract, and already, she felt the weight of it pressing down on her. Every time she walked through the doors of Ethan's luxurious penthouse, she felt more like an outsider, as if she didn't belong in this world of polished marble floors, towering glass windows, and the quiet hum of wealth all around her. She was supposed to be living the dream, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something important. She had agreed to this arrangement for practical reasons: money, security, and a future for her mother. But now, as the days passed and she spent more time in Ethan's world, she began to question if this was really what she wanted. Ethan was polite, distant, and professional, just as they had agreed. Their interactions were limited to formalities, brief conversations, and the occasional public appearance. He was, without a doubt, a man of few words. At first, Sarah had been relieved by his coldness. It made their arrangement easier to navigate. But now, she couldn't help but feel that maybe she was getting lost in the silence. They shared a home, but it was more like two strangers occupying the same space. One evening, after another quiet dinner, Sarah sat alone in the living room, gazing out at the city skyline. Ethan was in his study, buried in work as usual. She couldn't help but wonder what he thought of her. He was living his life, carrying on with his routine, while she was left to adjust to a new reality. She had known this arrangement wouldn't be easy, but the emotional distance between them seemed to be growing by the day. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone buzzing on the coffee table. It was a message from her mother, reminding her about the upcoming doctor's appointment. The urgency of the message hit her hard. She hadn't been able to fully focus on her mother's health with everything going on in her own life. But now, as she read the message again, it hit her. She had made a promise to herself and her family. She had to follow through, no matter how complicated things had become. As if on cue, Ethan appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He looked at her for a moment, his gaze sharp, but something in his eyes seemed softer tonight. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice low. Sarah paused for a moment, surprised by his concern. It was the first time he had asked about her well-being in days. She nodded, not sure what to say. The truth was, everything was fine, but not really. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind," she replied, not wanting to get into the details. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than usual. "If you ever need to talk, you know where to find me," he said before turning back to his study. The words felt oddly comforting, yet distant at the same time. Ethan had always been a man of action, not words, and his offer to talk seemed sincere but hollow. Sarah couldn't help but feel conflicted. She wanted to believe that he cared, but their arrangement wasn't supposed to be about feelings. It was just business. The next few days passed in a blur. Sarah's routine stayed the same: work, meetings, doctor's appointments for her mother, and then back to the penthouse where she and Ethan continued their carefully constructed lives. They had dinner together on occasion, attended charity events as a couple, and exchanged pleasantries when necessary. But every time they interacted, Sarah felt more like an actress in a play, going through the motions without any real connection. Then, One evening, as they were leaving a gala, Ethan turned to her in the car and asked, "Do you ever wonder what this is all for?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She had been so focused on surviving, on getting through the arrangement, that she hadn't stopped to think about the bigger picture. She looked at him, searching his face for any hint of vulnerability, but all she saw was the same guarded expression he always wore. "I'm not sure," she replied honestly. "But I do know one thing. I have to keep moving forward. My mom needs me. This is just what I have to do right now." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. As the car pulled up to the penthouse, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if this arrangement would ever evolve into something real. Or was she simply fooling herself, hoping for something more than just a business contract? That night, as she lay in bed, Sarah thought about Ethan's offer to talk. She had heard the sincerity in his voice, but it was hard to believe someone like him could ever truly open up. And yet, something about him, something deep inside her, kept urging her to try. Maybe there was more to this contract than she had originally thought. But for now, all she could do was wait and see where this strange, unexpected journey would take her. The days following the gala were a blur for Sarah. She had been living in a constant state of tension, caught between the responsibilities she had promised to fulfill and the growing feelings that she was starting to experience for Ethan. It wasn't supposed to be like this. They had an arrangement, clear, professional, and to the point. No emotions, no attachment. But as much as Sarah tried to convince herself that it was all just business, there was something that kept pulling her in. Ethan had always been distant, cold even, but there were moments, small moments, that gave Sarah a glimpse of something more. A soft glance when he thought she wasn't looking, the way his voice softened when he asked if she was okay, the way he occasionally shared a brief story from his childhood at their quiet dinners. These little moments made it harder for Sarah to keep her guard up. She had told herself that this was only temporary, that it was a contract, a means to an end. But her heart, despite her best efforts, began to question everything. One evening, Sarah found herself walking through the corridors of the penthouse, the soft light of the city skyline casting long shadows on the walls. Ethan was in his study again, as usual, working late into the night. She had gotten used to his late hours, but tonight felt different. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She couldn't explain it, but she felt drawn to him. She needed to talk to him, really talk. As she passed by his office, she hesitated. His door was slightly ajar. Without thinking, Sarah knocked softly. "Ethan," she called, her voice trembling slightly. There was a pause before he responded. "Come in." She opened the door slowly, finding him seated behind his desk, his face illuminated by the glow of his computer screen. He looked up at her, his usual stoic expression shifting into something softer, more curious. "Is everything okay?" Sarah bit her lip, unsure of how to begin. I just wanted to talk. About everything." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "What's on your mind?" For a moment, Sarah struggled to find the words. She had spent so much time trying to compartmentalize her feelings, but now they were spilling over. "I don't know," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't what I expected. I thought I could do this, just follow the rules, keep it professional. But something's changed, and I can't ignore it anymore." Ethan's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes softened as he looked at her. He stood up slowly, his movements measured. "I know this arrangement is unconventional, and I know it's not easy, but I never wanted it to be this complicated." Sarah took a step forward, her heart racing. "I never wanted it to be complicated either. But you're not just a business partner to me, Ethan. You're someone I'm starting to care about." The silence between them was thick with unspoken emotions. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "Sarah, Before he could finish, Sarah took a deep breath and spoke again, her voice more confident now. "I didn't sign up for love, Ethan. But I can't pretend like I don't feel something. I can't keep pretending this is just a contract." Ethan's expression shifted, his usual calm demeanor faltering. He walked over to the window, his back turned to her. "I didn't expect to feel this way either," he admitted quietly. "But I'm not sure how to handle this. I've always kept everything controlled, distant. I don't know how to let someone in." Sarah's heart ached for him. She understood more than he realized. She had always lived in the shadow of expectations, too. always doing what was needed, but never feeling like she truly belonged. "You don't have to handle it alone," she said softly. "We're in this together, whether we like it or not." Ethan turned around, his eyes meeting hers with a new intensity. For the first time, there was something real there, something genuine. "I don't know what's happening between us, but I'm willing to figure it out." Sarah smiled, a small, hesitant smile, but it was real. It was a smile that came from somewhere deep inside her, a place that had been locked away for so long. "We'll figure it out," she said quietly. Together. The moment lingered between them, heavy with promise. The contract was still in place, but for the first time, Sarah felt like maybe there was more to their arrangement than she had imagined. Maybe this wasn't just about money, security, or family obligations. Maybe this was about two people finding something unexpected in each other, a chance at love where there was none. As Sarah turned to leave the study, she felt a shift in the air. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something new. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to see where it might lead. The next few days felt like a blur for Sarah. There was a shift between her and Ethan, an unspoken understanding that had begun to replace the formality they had carefully maintained since the beginning of their arrangement. It was subtle at first, little moments that seemed to speak volumes. A lingering glance over dinner, the way his hand brushed against hers when he passed her a drink, the small, almost unnoticeable smiles they exchanged when their eyes met across the room. Each day felt like they were moving closer, though neither of them would admit it. Sarah couldn't deny the change in her feelings, but she didn't know how to navigate this new territory. They had made an agreement, a contract that was supposed to be about nothing more than appearance and obligation. But lately, she found herself thinking about Ethan in a way that wasn't just about the arrangement. There were moments when his stoic expression softened, and she saw something else there, something real, something human. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed conflicted. He had always been a man of control, a man who kept his emotions tightly guarded. But ever since their conversation in the study, he had been acting differently. There were times when he looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time, not just as a contract partner, but as a woman with her own desires and complexities. It was both comforting and terrifying at the same time. One evening, they were attending a gala together, one of the many charity events they had been invited to as a couple. The glimmering lights of the ballroom reflected off the polished floors, and the soft hum of conversation filled the air. Sarah looked around, feeling slightly out of place among the elegantly dressed guests. But as she glanced at Ethan, standing beside her in his perfectly tailored suit, she realized that for the first time, she didn't feel completely out of place. He was by her side, and in some strange way, she felt like she belonged there with him. Ethan noticed her looking at him and gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You're quiet tonight," he remarked, his voice low so only she could hear. Sarah shifted, her nerves suddenly on edge. "Just thinking," she replied, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "What about?" Ethan asked, his eyes never leaving her face. She hesitated for a moment before answering, not sure how to put her feelings into words. "About us," she said softly. "About everything." Ethan's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. "I've been thinking about that too," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what this is turning into, but I can't ignore it anymore." The weight of his words hit Sarah like a wave. She had known for a while that there was something changing between them, but hearing him say it aloud made everything feel so much more real. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Neither can I," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan reached out, gently placing his hand on hers, a simple touch that spoke volumes. "We're in this together, Sarah," he said quietly. "We'll figure it out, one step at a time." For the first time, Sarah felt a sense of calm wash over her. It wasn't the certainty she had been hoping for, but it was enough. They didn't need to have all the answers right now. They didn't need to know where this would lead. All they needed was to take it one step at a time, together. The night continued, and the gala faded into the background as they spoke more openly with each other. For the first time, Sarah felt like they were no longer just playing a role. She wasn't just the wife in a fake marriage, and Ethan wasn't just the distant billionaire she had agreed to marry for convenience. They were two people, finding their way through the mess of emotions they had tried to keep hidden. When the event came to an end, and the guests began to leave, Ethan turned to Sarah as they walked out of the ballroom. "Let's take a break from all this, yeah?" he suggested. "How about a quiet dinner tomorrow, just the two of us?" Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. "Hope. I'd like that," she said, her voice steady for the first time in days. As they stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights sparkling around them, Sarah realized that whatever happened next, they were on the same path now. She had no idea where this journey would take them, but for the first time, she felt like they might just be heading in the right direction. Together. The next day, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Ethan's invitation for a quiet dinner felt like a step in the right direction, but she still wasn't sure what that direction really was. They had agreed to this arrangement based on necessity, not love. But after their conversation at the gala, after the quiet moments they had shared together, she started to wonder if this was really just a business contract anymore. Could it be something more? Could it be love? When she arrived at the restaurant, she found Ethan already waiting for her at a corner table. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his hair neatly combed, and his expression as composed as ever. Yet, there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. He wasn't the distant, guarded man she had first met. There was something softer in his eyes, something more vulnerable that he had never shown her before. She felt the weight of her own emotions shift as she walked toward him. "Hey," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, as she took a seat across from him. She couldn't stop herself from smiling, despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. It felt like the first real moment between them, without the constraints of their contract. "Hi," Ethan replied, his lips curving into a small, genuine smile. "How are you?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to answer. How could she explain the mix of emotions that had been building inside her? "I'm good," she said finally, settling into the moment. "Just processing everything, I guess." Ethan nodded, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "I get that. I've been doing the same. What we're doing, it's not easy. But I think we're both starting to realize that it's not just business anymore." Sarah swallowed, her mind racing. Ethan had just said what she had been afraid to admit to herself. This wasn't just business. She wasn't just playing a role anymore. They had crossed a line, and neither of them could pretend otherwise. "You're right," she said, her voice steady now. "It's not just business. I don't know when things started changing, but they have. I've started to see you differently. It's confusing, but also kind of amazing." Ethan's gaze softened as he reached across the table, his fingers brushing against hers. The touch was gentle, but it held a depth that made her pulse race. "I never expected any of this," he said, his voice quiet, but full of sincerity. "I thought I could keep everything under control, keep it all professional. But somewhere along the way, I started to realize that what we have is real. It's not just a contract, Sarah. It's more than that." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat as she listened to him. She had always known that Ethan was more than the cold, calculated businessman he portrayed to the world, but hearing him admit it out loud made everything feel more real. She wasn't alone in this. He was feeling the same thing she was. "I'm scared," she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of what this means. Scared of where this is going. But I can't keep pretending like I don't feel something for you." Ethan squeezed her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "You don't have to be scared," he said. "I'm here. Whatever happens next, we'll figure it out together." Sarah's heart fluttered in her chest. She had spent so long protecting herself, building walls around her emotions. But in that moment, she felt them come crashing down. She had always believed that love wasn't for people like her, that it was something out of reach, something reserved for others. But now, with Ethan, it felt like love was something they could both find, even in the most unexpected of circumstances. As they continued their dinner, the conversation flowed more easily than it ever had before. They talked about their pasts, their fears, their hopes for the future. For the first time, it didn't feel like they were two strangers bound by a contract. It felt like they were two people, discovering something real between them. When the meal came to an end, Ethan stood and offered her his hand. "Shall we take a walk?" he asked, his voice gentle, inviting. Sarah nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I'd like that," she replied, taking his hand. As they walked through the city streets, the cool evening air brushed against their skin, and the bright lights of the city flickered around them. It felt like the world had shrunk, leaving just the two of them in this moment. For the first time since they had met, Sarah felt like she was truly seeing Ethan. Not as the businessman who had hired her, not as the man she had married for convenience, but as someone she cared about deeply. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she felt a sense of peace. They had started this journey for reasons that were anything but romantic, but somewhere along the way, they had found something real. And maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. As the days passed, Sarah and Ethan found themselves growing closer, even as the boundaries of their original arrangement seemed to blur. The more time they spent together, the more Sarah realized that the lines between business and personal feelings were becoming harder to define. What had started as a simple contract, a business arrangement to keep appearances and secure Ethan's inheritance, was now evolving into something more complex. Ethan had always been composed, measured, and distant, but now, there were moments when he opened up in ways Sarah had never expected. He told her stories of his childhood, of the loneliness he'd felt growing up in a world of privilege but devoid of love. She learned that he wasn't just the powerful CEO he appeared to be. He was a man who had long buried his emotions beneath the weight of responsibility. And Sarah, with her own struggles and dreams, was starting to see the man beneath the surface, the person she could actually care for. But with these new emotions came uncertainty. Sarah couldn't ignore the nagging doubt that still lingered in her mind. They had entered this arrangement for practical reasons, and while their feelings were undeniable, was this really something that could work long-term? Could love grow from such an unconventional start? She wasn't sure, but every moment spent with Ethan made her want to believe it was possible. One evening, after another dinner at the penthouse, Ethan invited Sarah to join him on the rooftop to watch the city lights. As they sat there together, the cool evening breeze brushing against their faces, Sarah felt the weight of the moment. Ethan had always been about control, but now, there was a vulnerability in his eyes that made her heart ache. "You know, I never expected to feel this way," Ethan said, his voice low. He wasn't looking at her, his gaze fixed on the city below. "I thought this was going to be just another deal, just a way to get what I needed. But now, I don't know what this is anymore." Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she looked at him. She had always felt a connection with him, but hearing him admit it was different. It made everything feel more real. "I've been feeling the same way," she admitted softly. "I didn't expect any of this. But now, I can't imagine my life without you in it." Ethan turned to face her, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "I never thought I would be here, Sarah. I never thought I would let anyone in like this. But here we are." There was a pause between them, and in that silence, Sarah felt something shift. It was as if the world had slowed down, and it was just the two of them, standing on this rooftop, feeling things they couldn't quite explain. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she touched his, the warmth of his skin grounding her. "I don't want to lose this," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "I don't want to go back to the way things were. I want this, whatever it is." Ethan's eyes softened as he took her hand in both of his, holding it tightly. "We won't lose this. I don't know where this will lead, but I want to find out with you." In that moment, Sarah realized that despite the uncertainty, despite the unconventional nature of their relationship, she didn't want to let go. This was real. She had never imagined that a business contract could lead to something so deep, but somehow, she had found herself falling for Ethan. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The next morning, as they shared breakfast together, Ethan looked at her with a new sense of purpose in his eyes. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice serious but soft. "We've been pretending for so long, pretending that this is just a deal. But it's not just a deal anymore. I want you to know that I'm in this for real, and I want to figure out how we make this work." Sarah's heart swelled with emotion, and she could see the sincerity in his eyes. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't about the inheritance or the contract. It was about them, about the connection they had built, something neither of them had expected. "I'm in this with you, Ethan," she replied, her voice steady. For real. For the first time since they had met, Sarah felt a sense of peace. This was no longer a business arrangement. It was a partnership, a real relationship that had started out of necessity, but had turned into something so much more. They still had challenges ahead, but now, with this new understanding between them, they were ready to face whatever came next. Together, days turned into weeks, and Sarah and Ethan's relationship continued to grow in ways neither of them had expected. What had begun as a cold, calculated arrangement was now something neither of them could deny, something real. They spent more time together, sharing quiet moments, long conversations, and even laughter. But despite the growing connection between them, the shadow of their original deal still hung over them. They both knew that the contract, the arrangement that had brought them together, was still in place, and with it came the uncertainty of what would happen when the agreement eventually came to an end. Ethan had always been a man of control, but Sarah noticed a subtle shift in him. The more they opened up to each other, the more she saw the vulnerability that had always been hidden beneath his stoic exterior. He was no longer just the powerful CEO of a tech empire. He was someone who had begun to trust her, someone who was willing to be vulnerable in a way he had never been before. But Sarah wasn't sure if that trust extended to everything. She had started to fall for him, deeply and without reservation. But there was still one thing she needed to know, the truth about why he had proposed this arrangement in the first place. She had always told herself that it was just a business deal, but now, it felt like there was more at play. She had to know if there were any lingering doubts or hidden motives behind Ethan's actions. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Sarah couldn't hold her questions in any longer. She had to know, for both of their sakes. "Ethan," she began, her voice steady but filled with curiosity. "I need to ask you something. I know we've both said we've changed the rules of this arrangement, but I still don't understand why you asked me in the first place. Why me? Why this deal?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Sarah could feel her heart race as the silence stretched on. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer than usual. "When I first came to you with the proposal, it wasn't about love. It wasn't even about finding someone to be a partner. It was about survival. My family." He paused, and Sarah noticed the shift in his eyes. "My family had made it clear that without a wife, I wouldn't get what's rightfully mine. I needed someone who would go along with the deal, someone who could keep up the facade, and you were the only one who didn't ask questions." Sarah's heart tightened as she listened to him. She had known there was more to the story, but hearing it from Ethan himself, hearing the raw honesty in his words, made everything feel more complicated. She had agreed to this, knowing it wasn't about love, but now, the question lingered in her mind. What was it now? Was it still just a deal, or was it something more? "But," Ethan continued, his voice growing more earnest, "somewhere along the way, I started to realize something. I realized that what I had with you wasn't just part of the arrangement. It was real. It's more than just a contract. You've become more to me than I could have ever imagined." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to say that, not after everything they had been through. She had always feared that once the contract ended, so would their connection. But hearing Ethan say those words gave her hope, hope that maybe, just maybe, this could turn into something real. She looked at him, her breath catching in her chest. "Ethan, I've been feeling the same way," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to feel this way about you. But I've been falling for you, more than I ever thought possible." Ethan reached out, taking her hand in his. "Sarah, I don't know what the future holds. For us, I don't know if this is just the beginning or if it's all we're ever going to have. But I do know one thing, I want to try. I want to see where this goes, and I want to do it with you." In that moment, everything felt different. They had started this journey as two strangers bound by a contract, but now, they were standing on the edge of something more. They didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, they were ready to face whatever came next, together. The future was uncertain, but the one thing Sarah knew for sure was that she didn't want to let go of Ethan, not now, not ever. The days after that conversation with Ethan felt like a turning point for Sarah. The air between them had shifted, no longer filled with the uncertainty and distance that had marked the early days of their arrangement. Now, there was something warmer, something more real. They still had the contract, the agreement they had made for convenience, for necessity, but it felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the growing feelings they had for each other. Ethan had been more present, more open with her. He no longer hid behind the cold facade of the businessman who had only come to her for a deal. He was becoming the man she had started to see in glimpses. Vulnerable, caring, someone who truly wanted her in his life, not just for the contract, but for who she was. And Sarah, for her part, was learning to let go of the fears she had kept locked inside. She had come into this arrangement thinking it would be just a way out, just a business transaction. But now, she was falling for him, more and more each day. The pressure of their original arrangement still lingered, though. Sarah couldn't shake the fear that it was all temporary, that when the contract ended, so would whatever they had built between them. She knew that Ethan's family still expected him to fulfill the terms of the deal, and she couldn't help but wonder what would happen when the time came to end it. Would they still have a future, or would everything fall apart? One evening, as they sat together in their favorite spot by the window, Sarah finally brought it up. "Ethan," she began, her voice soft but firm. "I know we've been trying to figure this out, but I can't keep ignoring the fact that this contract still exists. It's not just a piece of paper. It's something that defines everything we do. And when it ends, what happens to us?" Ethan looked at her, his expression thoughtful. He had known this conversation was coming, but he hadn't been sure how to address it. "I've been thinking about that a lot, too," he admitted. "The contract was supposed to be temporary, and I never imagined it would turn into what it has. But now, I don't want to think about the end of it. I want to think about what comes next." Sarah's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had been afraid to ask this question, afraid of what it might mean, but hearing him say he was thinking about the future, about something beyond the contract, gave her a new sense of hope. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan took a deep breath, his gaze steady as he looked at her. "I'm not ready to let go of what we have. Not yet. I want to find a way to make this work, not just as a contract or an agreement, but as something real. I want you in my life, Sarah, for real, and I'll do whatever it takes to make that happen." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she listened to him. She had never expected to hear him say those words, but now, in this moment, it felt like everything she had hoped for. "You mean that?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I do," Ethan said, his voice steady, but there was a rawness to it that made Sarah's heart ache. "I know this isn't the easiest thing, and we still have a lot to figure out, but I'm not walking away from this. From you." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when the fear, the uncertainty, was replaced with something real. She reached for his hand, holding it tightly in hers. "I don't want to walk away either. I've never felt like this before, Ethan. This us that feels like it could be something real." Ethan squeezed her hand, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "We're in this together," he said, quietly, "and I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, everything felt clear. They had started this journey as two people bound by a contract, by necessity, but now, they were something more. They didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, neither of them was afraid to find out. They were in this, together, and that was all that mattered. Weeks passed, and Sarah and Ethan's relationship continued to evolve. What had started as a business arrangement, a contract built on necessity and circumstance, was now a partnership based on trust, vulnerability, and real emotions. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she had felt so certain about anything. The contract still existed, but it no longer defined them. They had created something stronger, something deeper than either of them had anticipated. They spent time together every day, building memories, supporting each other through the ups and downs, and slowly learning to love in the most unexpected way. The future still loomed, filled with questions and uncertainties, but now, neither of them was afraid of facing it together. One morning, as they sat together at breakfast, the reality of their situation was undeniable. They had already discussed their plans for the future, what would happen when the contract ended. But as the days passed, they both realized that it wasn't just about the paperwork anymore. It wasn't about the money, the inheritance, or the public appearances. It was about them, about what they had built together. Sarah knew that the life she had dreamed of, a life where she could stand by Ethan as his partner, not just as a placeholder in his life, was within reach. Ethan, for his part, had made it clear that he wanted her in his life for good, and he wasn't going to let the contract be the thing that dictated their future. He was ready to take the next step. He had taken her to every charity event, every gala, showing the world that they were a team. But now, it was time for the world to know what they really were, not just husband and wife by contract, but a couple in love. It was one evening, under the stars on the rooftop, that Ethan finally did it. He turned to Sarah, his expression soft and sincere, his heart laid bare in his eyes. "Sarah," He began, his voice steady but full of emotion. I know this started as a contract, something neither of us planned to last. But I also know that what we have now is real. It's not just the arrangement we made. It's something more. I don't want to wait any longer, because I know what I want, and what I want is you. Sarah felt her heart race as she listened to him. The man she had fallen for, the man who had once been so guarded, was now opening up in ways she hadn't thought possible. He was asking for something bigger than just a marriage contract. He was asking her to build a future with him. He wasn't just offering her a life. He was offering her his heart. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. He opened it slowly, revealing a beautiful ring, a symbol of everything they had built together, everything they had come to mean to each other. Sarah, will you marry me? Not just because of the contract, but because I want to spend my life with you. I want us to be partners in every sense of the word. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she stared at the ring, her heart swelling with emotion. This wasn't a proposal born out of necessity or obligation. It was a proposal born from love. A love they had built together, despite all the obstacles, despite the unconventional way they had come together. Yes, Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, I will marry you, Ethan. I want to be with you always. As Ethan slid the ring onto her finger, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of joy and relief wash over her. This was real. Their journey, which had started out as a business deal, had become so much more. It had become a love story, one that had defied expectations and turned into something neither of them had imagined, but both of them had always wanted. Together, they had built something beautiful, and now, they were ready to take the next step. The city lights sparkled below them, but nothing shone brighter than the future that lay ahead of them. Sarah and Ethan had begun their journey as strangers bound by a contract, but now, they were partners, lovers, and soon, they would be husband and wife. And whatever came next, they knew they would face it together. Side by side,